Hello everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have quite a modest September wrap up. Fair warning, this is the first video that I'm filming with Brie in the room. She's currently crunching on a bone behind the camera. Hopefully you guys can't hear that too much. But if there are any shenanigans or chaos in this video, please excuse me. We're currently acclimatizing her to my office space and getting her used to being out of her crate for the majority of the day. So things are just a little bit all over the place right now. She is lying very close to the leg of my tripod as well. So I think we have a slight shake going on, but hopefully once again, that's not too noticeable. But September was actually the month of my readathon, the bookoplathon, and in regards to that, September was a complete and total disappointment. I actually only read 4 books in total, and I also DNF'd one, but that is less books than I've read in a month for, I want to say, at least as long as I've had BookTube. I think one month I read 2 books, which was like one December or November, which is like one of the busiest months for me work-wise, but generally I do read a lot more than 4 books. Of the 4 books that I did read, I think 3 of them were over 500 pages. One of them was like close to 900. So I definitely think a contributing factor to the small amount of books that I read was the amount of pages, with me just not quite having my usual like typical amount of pace that I do. I've been reading quite slowly for quite a few months. But one positive that came out of this is that the books that I read were actually highly rated. There's only 1 book of the 4 that is below 3 stars. Just before we get into the stats, I would like to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, which is once again the wonderful Book of the Month. If you guys are unfamiliar with Book of the Month, they are a book curation service where they give you like a hand-picked selection of the hottest titles of the month for you guys to choose from, and you can get them at a price that is kind of unbeatable, cheaper than you can pick up a hardback release anywhere else. And if you guys haven't heard yet, let me be the first to tell you that Book of the Month is not US only anymore, because Book of the Month has now started shipping to Canada. So I'm going to be showing you guys a couple of Book of the Month's hottest selections in my opinion, starting with the one in the blue box, which is Sign Here by Claudia Lux. So this one really reminds me of the guy on TikTok who, I can't remember his name, but he essentially does skits as somebody who works in hell, and they're really funny. This one is paranormal, but also I believe comedy, but this guy who works in the deals department of hell, and he will get a massive promotion if only he can get one more member of a wealthy family to sell their soul. My second pick of the month is a fantasy, which is Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. This one I'm hoping is going to be super atmospheric. This one follows the Yaga siblings who are estranged but have to come together to claim their inheritance, which, as you may have guessed, is the house with chicken legs. So because of the folkloric nature of this, I'm hoping it's going to be super atmospheric and also of course steeped in Jewish folklore. So if you guys like to get your hands on Sign Here, Thistlefoot, or any of Book of the Month's other October titles, you can head to the link at the top of my description box, click on it, enter the code Becca at checkout, and you will get your very first Book of the Month for $9.99. And like I said, Book of the Month have now started shipping to Canada, so Canadian friends may want to hop on that. So in September I read 4 books, which added up to a total of 2,343 pages and broke down to an average of 78 pages per day. Now something that's actually interesting is I accidentally, instead of breaking it down into an average per day, when I was working out the stats, I broke it down into an average per book, and the average per book is nearly like 600 pages, which just shows you how big the books that I was reading in September really were. But in terms of star ratings, we had just 1 3-star read, 2 4 stars, and 1 5, breaking down to an average of 4 stars overall. For the demographics, we had 1 new adult and 3 adults, and for the formats, everything I read was just like a standard formatted novel in September. For the genres, we had 3 fantasies and 1 romance that isn't necessarily a romance, but the themes and the topics are like heavily romantic. We'll talk about it when we get to the book. And in terms of the places where I sourced these books from, 3 of them I've hauled in 2022, and 1 of them is from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2022. Brie, baby, can you take your paw off the leg of my tripod, please? Please? So getting into those reviews, the first book that I read was the romance that wasn't a romance, which was of course Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. You guys will know if you saw my TBR that I was super hyped to read this one, and you know what, it didn't really disappoint. I didn't love it as much as I expected to. I thought this would be an instant 5-star, but I had a great time with this one. So this book is definitely for people with a particular taste, and I 100% can see that this is not for everybody, but I personally had a great time with it. So it's marketed as like an unconventional romance, so essentially the couple don't have to end up together at the end. It doesn't have to be a happily ever after or a happy for now. And we're following a girl called Magnolia Parks. It's like a gossip girl set in London, and she is an it girl. Her father, I think, is a famous music producer, and ever since forever, essentially, she has been in love with BJ Ballantyne, who's one of her friends, or was one of her friends when they were children. They've pretty much grown up together. He's a couple of years older than her. Both of the characters at this point in the novel are in like their very early 20s. When they were teenagers, they started dating. However, BJ ruined everything by cheating on Magnolia when she was 18, 19. And since then, they have this really toxic relationship where they are both still in love with each other and very much both want to be with each other. But Magnolia won't admit that she forgives BJ, or she won't forgive BJ, so they can be together. And so what she does is she actually just dates a bunch of guys to make him jealous. And because he can't kind of suck it up and admit his feelings to Magnolia, and because she keeps doing this to hurt him, he also hurts her in return by just sleeping with endless amounts of women. While all of this is going on, they still sleep in the same bed every night. Like, he stays at Magnolia's pretty regularly and they just sleep in the same bed without touching. They're best friends, they're constantly flirting, but they're not together because they won't just have a conversation and admit their feelings. The reason why you can see that this isn't for everyone is that they're toxic as fuck and they just hurt each other over and over again because they can't get over themselves, and there's definitely like a lack of communication in here. Magnolia in herself, while being a decent character to follow, has this really obnoxious trait of constantly like name dropping labels. Like, as soon as she sees somebody, the first thing she does is gives you a catalogue of what they're wearing, right down to the fabrics and the brands of everything that they've got on. Aside from the general toxicity of Magnolia and BJ, they also drag everybody else around them into this like sordid little drama that they've got on. There's also individual members of the group that's been brought into the conflict between them, so they are truly not just toxic to each other, which I mean, if two people want to be toxic to each other, absolutely fine, go off, have a nice time, but they're essentially ruining the lives of everybody around them as well. So as you can imagine, this book was very angsty, it was very dramatic, they're very on again, off again, and I love me a dramatic romance. I don't typically enjoy reading like not a realistic romance, but just like a standard contemporary romance with not a great deal of conflict. Doesn't typically do it for me because I'm looking for entertainment in books, and the more dramatic and angsty they are, the more entertaining they are to me, and this definitely delivered on that. There is also a little bit of a love triangle in here, and I really like the way that that played out, aside from once again Magnolia and BJ dragging people into that orbit that could really just do with not to be in there. Something else that I really loved about this is that the writing is just dripping with metaphor and it's so melodramatic. The prose in here is absolutely beautiful, and the relationship that Magnolia and BJ have going on is very much teenage infatuation, very much like I cannot live without you even if it destroys me, which is an emotion that you only really feel when you're a teenager and experiencing these kind of emotions for the first time, where it is like more of an infatuation than anything else. I do feel like the way that this was written and how dramatic the prose is really added to that sense of feeling and that sense of drama. So don't go into this if you're looking for a romance where like the main characters are good for each other and everything's gonna turn out fine and dandy. But if you like a romance where you're entertained a little bit and everything's just like super dramatic and not great, because like the twists in here just keep getting twistier, then maybe pick this one up. I gave it 4 stars and I had a really good time. The next book that I read was probably the reason why September didn't pan out quite the way I wanted it to, because I actually spent 18 days reading this book, but that was of course Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the final book in the realm of the Eldlings, and this is the final time that I will, well, it's not, but like it's the final time with any regularity I will tell you what the realm of the Eldlings is about. But I have recently posted a 28-minute video talking about the realm of the Eldlings with like the reading order and what it's about and like a breakdown of all of the series that's completely spoiler free, so I will link that if you guys want to check it out. But essentially the short version is that the Realm of the Eldlings is a 16-book series with 3 of the series, the first, the third and the 5th ones, following a guy called Fitz, who is the bastard son of Chivalry Farseer, who who is the prince in waiting. So Fitz is dropped off on the doorstep of the keep by his maternal grandfather, who doesn't want anything to do with him anymore, and Fitz makes his way back to his father, only to find out that chivalry has realized that Fitz is on his way to him and has abdicated the throne in shame and moved to the countryside. So with nobody really knowing what to do with him, he's predominantly raised by the stable master Burrich until he comes of an age that the king takes an interest in him and trains him to become the royal assassin. So we're following this boy from like 6 years old in Assassin's Apprentice to like 62 in Assassin's Fate. This is the final Fitz book ever, and it was a heartbreaker. I sobbed through so much of the end of this, and when I say sobbed, I mean sobbed. It wasn't like a few tears, it was like painful, uncomfortable sobbing. But this was truly like, I followed these characters for so long, and it was the end of an era in so many ways, because even if Robin Hobb sets further books in this world, a lot of the characters that Fitz knew from childhood have kind of disappeared throughout the course of this. So it would be like revisiting the place where you grew up 20 years later and realizing that everything's changed and you don't know anymore. So this was the end of an era in so many ways, but I did have such a great time with this. Absolutely favorite book of the year, gave it 5 stars. Robin Hobb drew everything from the entire 16 book series into this book, which is why I think it is so important for you to not skip any of the series in the realm of the Eldling, so you can truly get a full picture and also like really appreciate this book, because things are recapped pretty well in here, so you're caught up to speed on like the Live Ship Traders and the Rainwild Chronicles, which are the ones that don't actually follow Fitz. But this will just hit you so much harder if you've read all of the series, so you can catch like all of the little Easter eggs and truly appreciate just like the small moments in here. Up until the book before this in the series, you could see how all of the different elements of the realm of the Eldlings and all of the themes and the plots of the series were playing a role in this storyline. But it was only kind of when we got to book number 15 and 16 that you could see how Robin Hobb has very carefully pieced this together over it's over 20 years she was writing this series. I think it was 21 years, and how everything kind of like plays its role in this epic plot line. I loved how everything came together in here. My only real criticism is that I think some of the characters deserved better, and that some of the characters were doing things off page, which is fine because there's side characters in here, but they're also characters that we know and love from other places. So I personally would like to have seen what they were actually doing. Now this is a long book as it is 850 pages, but what I think that this could have actually done with is a companion novel that is told from the perspective of different characters to fill in all of those gaps, because while it's not super relevant to Fitz's narrative in here, and these books are first person, it is interesting content that I would have liked to see, and I think a lot of fans of the realm of the Eldlings would have also liked to see. But this was just an emotional roller coaster. It was so impactful. I'm so attached to all of these characters and it broke me, but such a good book, and would definitely recommend reading The Realm of the Eldlings if you haven't already. And if you don't know where to start, then like I said, you can go ahead and check out my guide. I then got started on my next installment of Is the Goldsboro Science Fiction and Fantasy Fellowship Worth My Money, which is a vlog series that I do. I will link the latest installment if you guys want to check it out ahead of watching this, so that you're seeing it in real time instead of being like spoiled for the results. But the first one that I picked up for that video was a big surprise, the biggest surprise of the month, which was the Embroidered Book by Kate Hartfield, which if you guys have seen me haul this, if you've seen me put it on a TBR, if you've been in a live show where I've been talking about it, you will know that I thought that I was going to hate this book. I did not want to read this at all, and I was fully expecting to DNF this within 100 pages, because this is a historical fantasy following real life historical figures, where the focus is definitely on the historical figures as opposed to the magical elements of it. And I don't really understand the point of the magical elements. Having read this book, you could have done it without. And I admit that I don't quite understand like what the goal was here with this, but I still loved it. So this is following Marie Antoinette and her sister Maria Carolina, also known as Charlotte in this book. So that Antoinette, and Charlotte. If you guys don't know about them in history, I didn't either, but I did a lot of Googling when I was reading this. So their mother was the Empress of Austria, and they have quite a large family. There's quite a large amount of siblings, even though everybody, like all the kids, are dropping like flies throughout this entire book, because you know the 1700s of it all. But they come from a large family, and they have like, as daughters, their responsibility to their family is to marry to further secure alliances across Europe. So Charlotte is sent to marry Ferdinand First of Napoli, I think is his official title, who is known as being like this monster, this horrible person, even though he's only like 14. And Antoine is sent to marry King Louis, is it the 15th of France. This story starts off when they're children and they're still at home and their governess is murdered, and in her belongings they find a little embroidered book that is full of spells. So they start to perform spells out of this book, and their main goal is to stop one of them having to go and marry Ferdinand, because like I said, he's known as a monster. And then as they grow up, they continue to practice magic, first off helping each other, and then eventually these stakes get larger and larger until they're trying to help their countries, stop revolutions, all of that kind of stuff. I really liked the magic system in here because we all know what happened to Marie Antoinette. Like, we know she doesn't have a happy ending, and this stays true to history in that, like, there's no miraculous saving of anybody in this book. If they died in real life, they died in this book. So I knew going through this that we weren't gonna have a happy ending, but what I didn't expect was to actually care about any of the characters. The magic system in here really lends to how kind of tragic the life of Marie Antoinette is, and I'm talking from the perspective of not really knowing a whole ton about history. So if she did bad things, I don't know what they are. I just know from like the perspective of Googling a few facts and also reading this book, which is partially told by her, and she's like sweet as pie in this book. But the magic system kind of adds to the tragedy of this book because it's all about sacrifice. So to perform a spell, they have to sacrifice a bunch of different things that kind of amount to the power of the spell. So these can be treasures, hopes, memories, love. And as these queens go throughout their lives, they have gaps in their knowledge, their memory, and their personality as they're constantly sacrificing things to further their own agendas. Now, for a lot of their lives, these two are also at odds because when they go to marry kings of different countries, they start to begin to want to further their own countries and make their own countries better. And we also have two approaches to magic in here. There is an order, which one of them joins, which is where magic is strictly regulated and kept for like a select few. And then there are the rogues, who are essentially people who don't belong to the order. And then, of course, one of them is a rogue. So we do have like an interesting magic system that I did enjoy in here, and I liked the way that it was used throughout and how it like affected the lives of Charlotte and Antoine. But the thing that I actually enjoyed the most about this was just generally following Marie Antoinette and Charlotte. I got so invested, and I spoiled myself multiple times because I kept googling all of the characters in here, and obviously like on wiki it says what happened to them, but I was still engrossed in what was going to happen next and how like it's the 1700s. So like I said, there's kids dying left, right, and center, which plays a part within the lives of these sisters. There's the revolution that happened all across Europe, which obviously would not be a good time for them. And yeah, I was actually engrossed in the historical element of it, to the point where like when we got to where Marie Antoinette's life starts to take like a steep downhill turn, I was affected. I was sad. I didn't want it to happen. My main kind of gripe, which could just be a lack of understanding on my part, is that the thing that the magic all kind of built up to in here, I didn't really understand the point, because it felt like Charlotte was trying to save her sister, which obviously we know isn't a thing that can be done because we know what happens to Marie Antoinette. So I didn't really understand the point of it in that regard, and like what role the magic played and all of that, and how like it built to this culmination. Like, I don't fully understand Charlotte's motivations for what she did right at the end of this book, and I don't think that the magic was overly necessary within here, although I think the whole point of this book is like, what if magic played a part? What if magic was a thing that existed at this time alongside all of this other stuff that was going on, especially like the revolution all across Europe. But yeah, historical fantasy isn't normally my thing, so this isn't the most eloquent review, especially because I was so drawn into the historical side as opposed to the magical side, and I also can't critique it in terms of like how realistic it is to the lives of the people that are portrayed in here, because I know absolutely nothing apart from like the bare basics of the French Revolution. But I definitely found it to be very engrossing, really love the writing in here as well, and I had a great time. Gave it 4 stars. We'll talk about my DNF now, because even though I DNF'd it after the final book that I read in September, I actually started it first, and that was Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca Escamay. So this was supposed to be the second book for the Goldsboro vlog. I made it 105 pages in and then decided that I didn't want to read this anymore. So this is set in the 1920s and it is about a girl who goes to Crow Island because her father has died and he's left her like his estate and he lived on Crow Island. This island is full of magic, and from what I can tell there's a prohibition that is stopping people from using magic, but this doesn't seem to apply to this island that the main character visits. One of her childhood friends already lives on this island, and there's also a lot of like fancy parties going on next door, and she's drawn to one of the women who lives in this house. I believe it's sapphic, although I didn't really get far enough to see how that developed, and I did not enjoy it. It was all very ambiguous, and I feel like part of that is to lend itself to this ethereal atmosphere that's going on, especially with all of these like crazy parties and there's like magic alcohol and stuff, and I can definitely get that and understand why that would be like a technique that the author used. But my kind of gripe with this is that while the writing was really nice and it was descriptive, there was no atmosphere in this for me because nothing was concrete and nothing was grounded. So the only reason that I know that this is set in the 1920s is because it says so in the synopsis. There was nothing about this when I was reading it that told me it was the 1920s, and obviously the 20s are so iconic because of the fashion and the lifestyle that everybody was living at that time. I felt like there was a very much a lack of description within the like outfits that people were wearing, and also there were like cars mentioned in here. It was very much like these characters are in the 1920s and they know it's the 1920s, so they don't feel a need to describe it. So they're not describing what the car looks like, they're just like, I got in a car, which is fine in terms of it being from the perspective of the characters. But for me, the one thing that I wanted from this was the glitz and the glamour of the 20s, and it just was not present. Like it was like she was wearing a shirt and trousers, and it's like, tell me the style, tell me the cut, tell me about the flapper dresses, I want it all, and I got nothing. I don't know what the ages are of any of the characters in here because it wasn't explained. Felt very much like isolated, like the narrator or the main character doesn't feel the need to explain anything because everything is like, it's normal, you know, there's nothing necessarily out of the ordinary going on here. So sadly this was not for me. I can see how it would maybe be for other people, but I just felt no desire to continue, so I didn't. And my final book of the month was a 3-star read, which is The Collarbone by Rebecca Zahabi. This one is an adult high fantasy with a really interesting world actually, which was probably my favorite thing about this. So this one is set in a world where we have very strict societal roles. We have the mages who live in the Nest, which is essentially a magic school, and a lot of the lore of this world revolves around winged giants. Like they think the Nest was built by winged giants. It stands on a cliff that's at the end of the world, like literally, so there's nothing out there, there's just like stars and blackness, like a never-ending sky at the edge of this cliff that the Nest perches on. And the mages in this world think that they are superior to everybody else. We also have a race of people, are they called the Cur? Yes. And they are kind of animalistic, like they have horns and a really interesting way of aging in here that I loved reading about. But they are very much oppressed. They're only allowed to have certain roles that the mages allow them to have. They're only allowed to have like a certain amount of jobs and are forced to live in a certain way. And then we have the Ungifted, which is just your general humans with no magical ability. The main plot of this, I guess, there isn't a plot in this book, which is my gripe with it and why I gave it 3 stars. But the plot hinges on a rebellion. So we have the equilibrium, which is that the mages are on top and everybody else is kind of oppressed. And then we have the rebellion that believe that everybody should be equal. However, the methods of the rebellion are actually quite violent, and so not everybody agrees with them. It's kind of like a bend the knee or die situation. If you don't follow the rebellion, we will trample all over you. Even if your beliefs are quite neutral, you either join the rebellion or you die. So we have 2 main characters in here. One of them is called Tatters, and he is a slave. He has a gold collar around his neck that forces him to do his master's bidding. However, we know from early on in here that there is something like going on with that. And we also have a girl called Isha who has a tattoo across her face. Now normally these tattoos belong to the Cur, but Isha is actually human, but she faces obviously a lot of prejudice because of this tattoo that she has that makes people think that she is one of the Cur. The magic system we have in here is very interesting. It relies on mental battles and your imagination. So they do something, it's called mind brawling, which is almost like a duel, where you have an impartial party create like an arena for you to duel in, and you do like mental warfare against each other. So you could think that you want to stab somebody, but you would have to imagine like the weight and the shape of the sword in your hand, and and also what it feels like to be stabbed so that you can inflict pain on other people. It's a really, considering I don't like ambiguity and things that aren't super concrete, I found this to be a really interesting magic system in the way that it works and in the way that you have to just like be so focused and precise with your thoughts when you're using this magic system. It can be used in a variety of ways as well, but just mind brawling is kind of the way that we see the most in here. And it also doesn't have to be physical brawling. You can like embarrass your opponent into conceding. That is everything that we kind of have going on in here, and that is just what this book is. It's 350-ish pages. I feel like it should have been longer and actually contained a plot, but all this does really is introduces you to the world, the magic, the two main characters, and leads up to where a plot is about to start. There is no actual plot in here. It just establishes everything that you need to know for a plot going forward. It feels like a prequel to a series as opposed to like the start of one. I could have done with just something, and if you added an extra 200 pages, I'm sure you could have given me more plot. So I don't mind that it's slow, and I loved the world building, the writing. Wasn't super attached to the characters, but I found them interesting, so I enjoyed everything that was in here. It just didn't have a plot, so I couldn't give it any higher than 3 stars, but I am very intrigued to carry on with this and see what happens, because the world building and everything that was kind of included in this book I really enjoyed. It just really is a shame that it doesn't have a plot. So there you have it. Those are all the books that I read in September. Like I said, not too many this time, but these 2 reasonable sized books. But these 3 were chunkers. Even this was 3 pages shy of 500 pages. But I should have known going into September that I was doomed, because the quick reads on my TBR, which was Magnolia Parks and also a fantasy romance, Her Soul for Revenge by Harley LaRue, they were both 500 pages each. So even my quick reads were not quick in September. So I should have seen this coming. I am just like a little bit disappointed because I was in the mood to read in September. Just everything I was reading was taking me so long. I am approaching things a little bit differently in October, and we're going to see how it affects the amount that I read. But I'm pretty much mood reading. I have a very small TBR, but overall I'm just reading what calls to me in the moment, which is actually just like a foreign concept to me at this point. So I am really having fun with it, and stay tuned if you want to see like the results of what happens with that. I also just want to take a moment to thank everybody who participated in the bookoplathon. It was rough for me this year, but I know that a whole ton of you guys read a lot more than I did, and I'm glad that you once again had a great time. I love seeing people have fun with the Bookopoly board. That's all it's about for me, and it makes me really happy to see you guys kind of succeed with it. But down in the comments, let me know if you did participate in the Bookoplathon. Let me know how much you read, because I know that there are actually quite a few people who, like me, read almost nothing. Of course, a big thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video, and please don't forget that if you would like to get your very first book of the month for just $9.99, you can head into my description box, click on the link, and enter the code Becca at checkout. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.